or else I had this tremendous glare over my head. Oh, Brendan, it looks so nice. I don't
It
think
does. It looks classy.
I'm not gonna send my picture now.
Yeah, forget it. Man, that looks like an
This is
organized
clean.
person.
It's clean now. Give it an hour or two.
I like it.
Yeah, the oak desk helps a lot with the appearance.
That's a huge book of Bible difficulties, man.
You never know.
Yeah.
That was the hard part. Now we have 2 bookcases, so it's like, what do I keep out and what goes back in boxes until I get the rest unpacked at the office? So it was.
Oh, that's cool, Paul.
Versatile books I could find.
Mm-hmm.
You can see down the hall a little bit there.
More stained glass.
We do have stained glass. I didn't know if you'd be able to see that or not.
Yeah.
It's actually I think stained plastic, but
Oh.
but it's
See, he's got the better mic set up.
yeah, that mic was a little bit of a shock.
Is it a condenser mic, I guess?
What's that? The microphone I have?
Yeah.
I don't know what you call it. It's that big thing sitting there. It looks like R2D2.
Yeah. I know that. Yeah.
Okay. It's
That's
Oh, that's neat.
it's Yeti, blue Yeti. That's what it is.
Cool. All right, but you guys both got the dual monitor thing going on. That's neat.
Yeah, I don't know. I've got so used to it, it's hard for me to work at home. You know, if I have the laptop set up.
I do love that about these iMacs. They're big enough for me to have 2 full size. Like I can have a Word document and web browser, or Word document and PowerPoint in decent size, side by side. I hate it. Boy, now I can't go back to tabbing between, the old days where you had to highlight, copy, tab to your PowerPoint, paste, tab back to your document, tab back. Oh. Times were rough then. That was the old days.
I was guessing that when you were working in engineering that you probably had a dual monitor set up.
I didn't, but I usually had 2 computers.
Oh, well.
I'd have a Unix-based CAD system usually running, and then a desktop machine running beside it.
When I did support, I would always poke around and try to get them to order me extra parts and things, and finally get set up how I wanted to be.
I always like going down to the support guys area because it was like a Houston control center or something, like 2 and 3 and 4 monitors and all this stuff going on. It looked really high tech.
When I was working in that, there was a manager who, I was with IBM, but my job was at Amtrak, and there was a manager there at the time. He's no longer there, so I don't worry about saying too much. But he would be able to charge to a locomotive overhaul, anything I ever needed. If I wanted a better computer, better.
Sound check. Okay, go ahead.
A lot of hardware support where I was actually taking parts out and things like that. It was mostly software, but but I told him I wanted just a cordless screwdriver for when I did need to do that. I could just keep it charged on a dock on my desk and it'd be right there ready to go. And he walks in one day and he has one of his guys hand me what in his estimation was a cordless screwdriver. It was like a 20-volt DeWalt drill in a big box with extra batteries. Like it's carried in a suitcase, a small suitcase, and it was very generous, but it was not practical.
And that was going to a locomotive on paper anyway, huh?
I'm not kidding.
Well, yeah.
That's fine.
They have ways of. One day, all the managers got new laptops, and I think it was a similar thing.
All right, I am not too far away from being done. Let me check my sound. Is it coming in strictly mono, or does it sound somewhat out of both speakers?
Sounds rich and clear.
I've got you in both ears, but I can't tell if it's stereo or mono.
Okay, that's fine. For some reason, it's showing in one channel over here, but I've got it set supposedly go to 2, so we'll see. Okay, we're going to start a few minutes late. I've got 1 or 2 more things. So I'm going to go silent for a couple minutes. Y'all feel free to keep talking.
All right.
Talk among yourselves.
John had an issue today. I think his son he got sick at school, and he needed to go pick him up.
Oh,
That's why I started the chat. Why John's running a little bit behind.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Eric, when they have $1 million budget for some big overhaul,
oh yeah.
that they don't a line item of a few laptops for $1,000 really isn't going to show up, I guess. I'm not sure it's always the most honest thing they did, but
Yeah, sometimes all that's kind of understood. It kind of depends. You'd have to know the thought process. There's buckets of money.
Sometimes there's equipment that the managers need or
Right.
feel like they need to do their job, and so
name this book, The Gospel of Practical.
I think that
Alright.
was me.
Yeah, I got the video ready.
I think that was me with a headset on back
It
in the
was.
early days.
You're
got
going
that.
to love it.
Oh no, I don't think so. I think I got to look at that. I think I got that headset laying here next to me somewhere, down here on a shelf.
All right.
Either I pitched it.
Okay, be right back.
That was before I had the big microphone, Eric, that's sitting on my desk.
I don't see what you guys are referring to.
Oh, John started playing a video. He's got a little montage of the early days.
Oh,
It's the 200th episode.
oh, okay. I didn't see it. Where are you seeing that?
Well, he stopped it. He just was making sure it would play, I think. And I caught a glimpse. I said, well, who's the guy in the glasses? And I'm still not sure if I'm going to go back to glasses or stick with the contacts.
Brendan, what's in your diplomas on the wall there?
Well, the one I paid all the money for hasn't arrived yet.
Oh.
The history degree is en route, but the one is my membership from the National Forensics League when I was in high school. I did speech and debate. And then the one next to it is probably the one I'm more proud of than diploma or anything else, and that's the Edwards School of Preaching one.
Oh.
I need a school of preaching certificate. Ugh.
You went through the Edwards thing?
We were the guinea pig class at the Samaria Church of Christ in Cookville with David Eldridge. We were the first ones. So it was just David Eldridge and Johnny. And it would only lasted a week instead of the normal 2 weeks at Ellettsville when he was there. So a lot of work.
Wow.
You know what? Go ahead.
No, I was going to be obnoxious. I was going to say, I'm starting a preaching school.
You know that's where I am, right?
Yeah.
Ellettsville.
Speaking of Ellettsville, something just came up about Ellettsville. Is there a ship from World War II there, a museum ship? Paul?
No, I don't.
No,
think.
you don't know of it. It might have been a different name. It might have been something like Ellettsville. I was thinking, well, that's kind of odd that far inland to bring a ship, but
Well, the Ark is in Kentucky, I think. So
that's true.
It doesn't say Edwards School of Preaching, does it? Brendan. It doesn't say Edwards School of Preaching, does it? Oh.
he's cuting in and out.
Mine's going to be called Brian School of Superior Preaching. Just so all of you know. You know, that'll be the name of my school.
No
I'll call
representation is made.
mine-
The quality of education is greater than the quality of education provided by others.
I'll get sued by some of my students.
Brian, you need to call it Brian's #1 School of Preaching.
Oh,
Brian's number one.
AAA, Brian's #1.
Yeah, it's right, AAA.
Brian's School for Preaching for those who can't preach good.
Yeah, them that can't preach good. That's right.
And then you need to
You know,
make
I
one of
made a
those.
mistake once of making a comment
right
in
there.
class, and I was kind of making a joke, and I said, you know what they say, those that can't do teach, and those that can't teach, and I was going to say teach college, and somebody said preach. So I got my comeuppance at that point.
Well, then you need to
Yeah.
make an infomercial, Brian, with an actor that does really good with overacting. Oh, my sermon was so bad. They nearly fired me. What should I do?
Right. And this is good stuff, guys. Keep these ideas coming.
All right. We are just a few minutes away. I got one more thing to do here. I hate to be running behind on our 200th episode, but that's just the
We're
way the
used to
cookie crumbles. Yeah, we're used to it. All right. Why are you coming over here? There we go. Go back there.
I did have an idea. I think Brian and Paul and I should have a wig handy, and we can be like a guest on certain occasions. You know, we could be. Today we have with us.
And then what
I
we
happen
can
to
do-
keep mine with me at all times.
Oh yeah!
Yeah.
And then
So
we can
I'm
have
ready.
Do
we can
it!
have
Do
our
it! Let's
wig-
see it! Let's see it!
We can have our wig out
Special
session.
guest star.
I like that special guest star. Have a wig out session. 149.
I think I've got a picture of me somewhere in a rainbow wig.
Yeah.
That was before rainbow was, taken from us, so to speak.
Yeah.
But it was a
Back when it-
clown.
Back
more
when it
of a
was a
circus.
sign for no more rain, right?
Yes.
Okay. So let's make sure we got everything good to go here. All right, that's working. Okay. Get my brain in gear. All right. I think I got everything good to go. All right, if you're on our Facebook page and you're watching the video successfully, just kind of drop a comment in there if you would. Just say, Truth Factor is the greatest. And we'll know that you're not watching us, that someone paid you to say it.
The 100th person to say it.
We're taking
No,
a survey.
200 person.
Who's your favorite Truth Factor host?
I'm gonna get everyone I know to call in then. I want number one.
The first person, no, the
Love the
200th
phone
person
line.
win a prize.
If you like Brian, press 1.
Sometimes when I'm driving, I used to go, especially in Chicago, people would tell me I was number one.
That was the other Paul Adams show.
That was something.
All right.
That happens a lot in California. I bet Paul or Tom would tell us.
Yeah. Where's Tom? Is he with us?
Tom's
Yeah.
here.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
I think.
All right. Well, I guess we need to start doing some damage here, so let's get this ready. Oh, does it still say that, Tom?
It sure does.
On which one?
The Truth Factor Live page.
Okay, bear with me just a minute, guys. I need to correct that. I thought I had, but I guess not. Boy, you're right about that. I fixed the date, didn't I?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, you next study, so yeah, you did that, so yeah.
Well, I mean, I put today's date on there, but let me update that.
Yeah, and the thing about fixing this is we're going to be in this for a while, so.
Yeah, that's true. All right. Let's see.
24 weeks.
Yeah, sure.
All righty, and I'm pushing the update. And
All right, I will.
3,
Tell me when it's updated.
2, 1. It should be updated now.
Okay, now let me whatever you call it, refresh it.
All right.
All right, now it's good. Got it. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. All right, let's get ready. You know what was interesting when we did the Truth Factor or the Scriptural Way broadcast here at Seminole Point? I can't remember the final number, but we were like, I want to say in the 230s as far as when we brought that to a close. We went 5 years with that from 2009 to I guess it was 2014. We ended that study. I hope to bring it up some point in the future, maybe a little different format, but we'll have
I
to
think
see.
during the last year you had me remotely as a guest host a couple of times.
Yeah,
and that pretty much ran it right into the ground.
it did. It did. That was the turning point.
Yeah, I was at the Paul Adams show today on
nice.
YouTube and noticed that you got what 26 subscribers, I think it is.
Yeah, I need to have. I forget how many it is. There's a number.
Yeah, you need to boost that post.
All right.
If it's,
Then you can get 28.
I can get an actual YouTube URL where it would be like youtube.com/Paul Adams Show. If I had enough followers, but I don't. So
You sure about that?
Yeah, I was going to say I did the
thought they
Google
released
search
that.
for it, and you popped up 7 or 8 videos down, but that was about it. I mean, there's stuff that hardly mentions Paul Adams ahead of you, so.
The views expressed regarding the Paul Adams Show does not necessarily reflect the views of the Truth Factor Show. All right.
John, you need to correct that.
but it should.
You need to correct that.
No personal
The
endorsements
views-
now.
The views of the Paul Adams Show do not reflect the views of the Truth Factor.
What did I say?
May not or something like should
Oh,
not.
okay. All right, let's go ahead and get ready to start. Okay. 3, 2, 1. Greetings, I'm John Duval. Welcome to another Truth Factor discussion. This is our 200th episode. I was thinking about that earlier today, gentlemen, about this being the 200th episode. I must clarify, it's not the 200th attempt at a Bible study, but it's the 200th successful study. Or, well, I shouldn't say successful just yet because we're just now getting it underway a bit late. Gentlemen, it's good to see everyone today. Let's see. Let's start with you, Paul. How are things going for you?
Very well, right here in Ellettsville, Indiana. Glad to be studying, and I had not kept track of the number of episodes, John, and you were the one who told me that today is number 200.
Yep, that's exactly right. Yeah, Eric, how are you getting along?
Great, and congratulations to you guys on 200. Who has been there for all 200 of them? Anyone?
Tom, Paul, and I.
That's awesome.
As a matter of fact, here in a little bit, I have a video to share, a compilation that I put together. So you'll enjoy that, I hope. Y'all may not be able to hear it as far as the guys in the Hangout, but the people at home will. So you could probably mute your mics and watch it on the video there. Brian, how are things going with you?
Well, we're doing good up here in the Hillsboro, Oregon area. Finally getting a little rain, so we're pretty blessed in that. Maybe we'll get our forest fires under control and quit smoking everyone out in the country. So
That's nice. Yeah, hope so. Brendan, you doing okay?
He said just skip past him. He's working on audio.
Oh, okay. Just nod your head, Brendan. He can't hear us either. All right, Tom, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine as well. All is well on the southern West Coast. I do remember rain in past history.
You remember rain?
And maybe it'll come back in the future. But it's good to be here and continuing our studies.
All right, very good, very good. All right, well, I'll tell you what, like I said a while ago, this is our 200th episode of the Truth Factor discussion. And we're not going to spend too much time celebrating and belaboring that point, but it's been almost 5 years. November 21st, I believe, is the date that'll be 5 years. So in preparation, I have prepared a video. And boy, have we changed. And not just us, but Google Hangouts. This is what we used for the longest time, Google Hangouts. And so what you're about to look at is the way Hangouts looked in the early days. So let's see if we can get that going. I haven't had time due to a sick child to be able to test the volume of the video, but let's see, 3, and here we go. Well, here we go.
Name this book The Gospel of Practical Application. And so I see that throughout this book of just everyday living, and I think that makes a
They
good
would need to understand dealing with the rift that existed between Jews and Gentiles.
Exactly. What comment to kind of make about the 12 tribes which are scattered abroad? Exactly.
Can I throw in something? An observation concerning John's view on this passage. There may be somewhat of a connection to
like Paul, who buffeted his body daily.
Right.
Well, can I add a couple things?
Now you can.
All right. Before we move on to that, because I do have some comments on that, I just want us to understand.
And not for the sake of encouraging one another in the joint worship of the Heavenly Father.
Well, I mean, this is supposed to be a communion. It's supposed to be a thing that we do together.
Is that most congregations, we set aside a time in which we partake of that, and so that's a way in which it's not just what.
Well, welcome to another Truth Factor discussion. I hope that your Wednesday, that is October the 7th, is going well. And you know, it is the first Wednesday of the rest of your life.
This chapter, he says, not only did I have the joy of finding Titus, but I also had the joy of Titus bringing me news about you and their desire to be repentant.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we remind ourselves
in
of
verse
all
9 that you all were made sorrowful to the point of repentance. So whatever is going on here, the Corinthians clearly have an overall thing that they need to change as well. Now,
qualities to our faith, certainly important, but yet contingent upon the strength of each other.
Mike, do you think a good term might be attributes?
You know, it's easy to start well, and it's easy to begin a New Year's resolution or a diet plan or any of those kind of things. But then as soon as we start feeling hungry, or as soon as it starts to get a little old,
how highly we think of ourselves, we're not going to be saved without coming humbly to God, and just like every other person has to. And so that puts us in a recognition of the relationship that we have with other Christians, and how we need to have that kind of humility and that kind of care.
And you look at the different steps in the plan of salvation, if you will: repentance, turning away from
relationship that we have with other Christians, and how we need to have that kind of humility and that kind of care.
And you look at the different steps in.
Well, did that bring back memories, Paul and Tom? Oh, I tried to show Daniel, because he was with us for a while, Royce Bell, and then we saw Seth on there because he was with us for a time. Then, of course, you saw Wayne. We had some others that stood in for an episode or two that that aren't shown on the clip. I tried to make sure I had Mike in there as well because he was with us for a while. So get the tissues out and let's see what the next 5 years brings. And you notice my hair is more distinguished now. Distinguished. At least that's what I'm telling myself. All righty. Your hair is here. All righty. Okay, now that we've had fun with that, give me just a second there. Paul, do me a favor real quick. Let everybody know how they can participate while I take a second to get us started visually for Luke.
You can just log in using the guest login or any of the social media logins. And if you'll do that, then your comments and questions can be introduced. And then we will try to read those in on the air and include that as part of our study. If you're watching via Facebook and the live video there, you can make comments underneath that video just using the Facebook comment feature. And if you will do that, then we can also introduce your comments, your questions, try to answer any questions and include your thoughts as we study through God's Word. John?
I appreciate that, Paul. I've still had very little success in re-enabling the Facebook chat. vMix, the program that we use, has a social media connector there that lets you bring in the chat comments from the Facebook feed and actually a couple of other social media apps such as Twitter and so forth. And what I've gotten into for the last month, for whatever reason, when I sign in to vMix Social via Facebook, it does not make the connection. So we won't be able to bring the Facebook comments on the screen. We will, of course, bring them into our study. But for those who comment at live.truthfactor.com, we should be able to share that on screen. And I apologize when I threw it to you, I still had the Hangout muted from the stream. So you look like one of those silent movies from long ago until I finally brought your sound back in. So other than the black and white and the Charlie Chaplin hat missing, you look perfect. All right, so let's go ahead and get our study underway today. As I mentioned earlier, we are about to study Luke, and we're going to start our study of Luke. We're going to be beginning in chapter 1 today. Gentlemen, there's not really a lot of introduction that we're going to share regarding Luke. Luke, of course, is one of 4 gospel writers. One of the things that I found interesting about this, and I'll share this with you, of course, is that it'd been interesting. It's because Luke set out to record the events to help the faith of a friend or a fellow associate by the name of Theophilus, to help his faith. And it seems to be that's one of the reasons why he compiled this particular gospel record. Are there any comments that y'all would like to make regarding Luke and the Gospel of Luke before we actually get into chapter 1? Anybody?
John, just real quickly, we do have 4 Gospels, like you mentioned there, and 3 of them we describe as the synoptics because they run along the same path. Basically, they're appealing to different audiences. Matthew appealed to the Jews. Mark is believed to be a Roman audience, and Luke is writing to Gentiles. And some of the things that are emphasized in this letter kind of point toward that idea.
Yeah. Have y'all ever done any research into the scholarly way of thinking regarding how the various writers, the sources from which they compile their information?
You know, some of that, and I don't think that's very. It's not a very biblical approach, but I think a lot of times more secular scholars suggest that there was an original gospel that some of the other gospel writers took from, but I believe that that's really not a true biblical example. I suspect, in fact, if we go back to the Old Testament, we can see insinuations or prophecies that there would be 4 testimonies about the life of Christ. If you go back and you look at the language of the branch, for example, the branch is always described with 4 characteristics. He's God, he's a man, he's a servant, and he's a king. And we kind of say that kind of breaks down what the Gospels are about. The king, that's Matthew, the servant of Mark, the man of Luke, and the God of John. So, like I said, I kind of question. I don't think there's really any biblical evidence that there was another gospel account. I know that tends to be more secular scholars that suggest that. And the reason they suggest that is because the gospel accounts are so parallel, that they're all telling the same story. And the secular perspective is to doubt that they were inspired. Therefore, they must have all drawn from a common source.
Well, I wouldn't say them drawing from a common source would negate the inspiration. You know, I mean, it's for instance, one thing I was reading, and like you said, suggested there was like a fifth, what we might call a fifth gospel, because of the similarities between like Matthew and Luke. That's not necessarily in Mark, but yet you can tell Mark was referenced because of what's contained between Mark and Luke, or Mark and Matthew. But I understand what you're saying there, and I'm not trying to suggest that there wasn't inspiration. I believe there was. But it is the commonality and the differences are very interesting, you know.
Another thing to consider, too, is a lot of the way the gospel testimonies work together is there's a sense that each one expects you to have a familiarity with the other. In fact, Luke's very first statement we're going to see here is to suggest that the reader already has a familiarity of the gospel accounts by what he's going to suggest is what else has been written. But you might look at something, for example, like the 7 statements Jesus makes on the cross. You can only gather those 7 statements by bringing the 4 gospels together. And again, that kind of speaks to that characteristic of a totality of 4. And the early testimony, I believe, at the beginning of the 2nd century, I believe that the testimony there is that they had a knowledge of only 4 gospels too. But I agree, John. It doesn't necessarily imply that they're not inspired if there was another document. What I mean to say is that that the theory of a 5th gospel was created not by biblical scholars, but by secular scholars.
That's a good point.
So that was what I was saying.
Yeah, and that's a very valid point. Many times people look to try to disprove that inspiration there. Yeah.
And there's another kind of view that instead of assuming there was a actual written documented source like what they usually refer to as Q, it could just be they were well-known sayings of Jesus. And sometimes you have these statements by Paul, the saying is trustworthy, and there were incidents in Jesus' life. And I've run into this where I meet friends who know someone else, especially someone who's maybe a preacher or something like that, and they like Floyd Chapelier comes to mind. And if you know Floyd, you know some Floyd stories, and usually the people that I meet that know Floyd have heard some of the same Floyd stories because these stories kind of circulate among people that know Floyd. And so it wouldn't be surprising that these very big events in Jesus' life were well known to the people that knew him and were talked about. And so that those same events end up in these various gospels. If there was a collection of sayings, perhaps we just don't know. There's no information given to us about the process by which these gospel accounts were set down in writing, except that Luke actually gives us he's the only one that gives us some indication of how he went about compiling his gospel. I've heard it argued that it sort of depends on your nature of inspiration, that someone could have been on a faraway island on the other side because the Holy Spirit just dictated to them exactly what to say, and it wouldn't matter really, what their process was. And in the end, I guess that's true. If it's inspired, it doesn't really matter at all. But Luke does give us a little insight into the human side of that equation.
Sure, they had to do apparently some legwork, and something that we forget about, or at least I've forgotten about through the years while teaching. We tell people, you need to read your Bible every day like they did in the first century. Well, that's not entirely accurate. They had the Old Testament scriptures, but as far as what we understand to be the New Testament, that compilation didn't come for many years. I mean, much of the teaching that would have been done would have been oral. much of the telling the stories of what Christ taught would have been by, literally by hearing. Faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the Word of God. And it wouldn't have been until finally someone began to write these things down and make copies of them. And that kind of seems what Luke has set out to do. Theophilus heard these things and believes them, but Luke wanted to give him an assurance of those things. And so it's, I figure at best what they did is they probably rehearsed what they heard preached on the first day of the week. That's probably how the families continued to teach the message for the first couple of decades at least. Anyway, interesting.
And there's a lot of Holy Spirit activity in those early days as well.
Yeah.
Oh,
right.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. We had a preacher here one time who was visiting with us, and for whatever reason, we were not able to let him use his the PowerPoint presentation he had prepared, and so he said, I will do it the second century way. As in, you had a little bit more completion. All the books had been written and so on, but even with that, they weren't compiled until I think we have lists of books being put together, maybe 3rd century, but it wasn't until a little bit later than that even, where we've got what we call the canon. Those books recognized as the standard, which is what that word canon is dealing with, a reed, a canon, I think so.
All right. Speak of read, there's reading. Let's read Luke chapter 1. All right, so much for that segue. All right, tell you what we're going to do here. Let me bring our outline up that we're going to be following there. And we're going to go ahead and take the first 4 verses here of Luke. And I'll read this, and then we'll make a few comments about it. And then we're going to try to approach our study a little bit differently than we did with Hebrews. Not much, of course. But where we kind of break up our individual participation a little bit more so there's not quite a lengthy monologue by one individual or 2 individuals. And let's see. Hey, let's notice here, beginning in Luke chapter 1, we're reading the first 4 verses, and then we'll kind of do some discussion here about this. We're looking at the first 4 from the New King James translation. And here's what we read. Inasmuch as many have taken in hand to set in order a narrative of those things which have been fulfilled among us, just as those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word delivered to us, it seemed good to me also, having had perfect understanding of all things from the very first, to write to you an orderly account, most excellent Theophilus, that you may know the certainty of those things in which you were instructed. All right, gentlemen, anything in particular that maybe jumps out and maybe catches your attention regarding these initial statements by Luke? I find it interesting that he says here, notice there again in verse 1, where he says, I've set in hand to set in order a narrative of those things. That's the New King James translation. And I think, Eric, didn't you say this a while ago that here we are looking at the case in point where Luke clearly tells us his intentions and makes a reference, at least to somewhat, towards his method?
Yes, in fact, Luke is specifically says that he's a secondhand hearer of these things. He received them from the eyewitnesses themselves. So when we look at the 4 Gospels, John was an eyewitness and Matthew was an eyewitness. And Luke was not, but we understand that we can trust and rely on what he says because it was inspired by the Holy Spirit.
Absolutely, yeah. All right. Any other thoughts about that?
Sometimes the word beginning does not refer to the beginning of time or to the creation, but from the beginning of the gospel. And here, I think Luke is just saying he certainly refers to things that happened prior to the preaching of the gospel in Acts 2, which is probably the idea of the beginning. But the things that were preached were by men who were eyewitnesses of what had happened in the life of Jesus. And so just a very minor point to note.
Okay, that's a good point, though.
One other comment to add might be that the term that he uses here, that's sometimes translated as orderly account or in order, could be suggesting, and many people assume it is suggesting, that this will be a chronological compilation of the life of Christ, and that the other Gospels are probably not chronological, that they probably are more brought together by their subjects. So we'll see in the book of Luke many times things that are all together in one place, say in Matthew or Mark or John, that Luke has them in different places in his life, more reflecting that chronological nature.
Yeah, I've heard it kind of explained that way, and that's when when I was at college, we had a teacher that kind of put forth that idea that Luke set out to do a chronological breakdown of the life of Christ. Yeah. All right, and I see no reason to doubt that. I mean, it had to be something that made sense and could help excellent Theophilus. Who was good old Theophilus? Any ideas? We started our study in Luke on Tuesday morning and talk about a lot of overlaps. We're going to study a harmony of the Gospels, really. We're looking at Luke. And someone asked their question, who was Theophilus? And I gave the most brilliantest of answers. He was one that Luke wrote the letter to.
There's a couple of theories, of course. Some speculate that he wasn't really a person at all. It means a lover of truth or something like that. But most people do believe that there was an actual person named Theophilus. And, it's beyond that, we don't know for sure. One speculation is that he had been a patron of Luke and perhaps Paul as well, that maybe he had supported them. He's clearly an important person by his title there, is a title that you would give to maybe a government official. And it's possible that he had been a financial supporter of Paul and Luke. But again, that's just speculation. We don't. I don't think we have any information about Theophilus unless someone else knows something.
I think it's God. Theo is God.
Oh, right.
Philus is lover, is love, and so one who loves God. But I've heard that too. Whether it was a real person or to all who would love God. But certainly, it reads here more like a real person.
Yeah. What I do find interesting, and let me bring up the, I think it was the New American Standard rendering of this text here. Y'all can see behind the scenes here. I'll just do the English Standard Version. Notice here it says, verse 4, he's writing this orderly account, and then it says that you may have certainty concerning the things you've been taught. So that kind of helps us to understand even more so the purpose. All right, so let's continue, unless there's any other thoughts or comments real quick. Let's go ahead and continue here with our study, and the next section that I'd like for us to read, and hey, if y'all catch a comment from Facebook or chat, or the chat room, please remind me, and I'll catch that. We're going to look at verses 5 through 25. We're looking at the story of Zacharias and Elizabeth. And before we do much discussion of it, let's go ahead and kind of begin to break this down. We're going to read verses 5 through 10. And Paul, would you mind reading for us in verses 5 through 10 of Luke chapter 1, please?
Be happy to do that, John. Luke 1, 5 to 10, it says, there was in the days of Herod, the king of Judea, a certain priest named Zacharias of the division of Abijah. His wife was of the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. And they were both righteous before God, walking in all the commandments and ordinances of the Lord blameless. But they had no child, because Elizabeth was barren, and they were both well advanced in years. So it was that while he was serving as priest before God in the order of his division, according to the custom of the priesthood, his lot fell to burn incense when he went into the temple of the Lord. And the whole multitude of the people was praying outside at the hour of incense.
All right, thank you, Paul. Paul, when we kind of look at this text, it's not a new story of the Lord using an elderly couple who is beyond the age of childbearing to bring a very particular individual into this world. But what I thought was interesting about this is his role as a priest and what would have been his responsibility, this yearly responsibility chosen by Lot as it says there in verse 9. You got any thoughts or comments about that?
Yeah, certainly that's true. We know in the story, the account of Abraham and Sarah, how they were both old and God blessed them with a child. But here we have a very, very righteous couple who carefully followed the commands of God. And that here, even in their work that they did, Zacharias was of that tribe that he had special work to do before God. And he was in the process of doing that and happened to be offering incense. It's interesting to me, all the people, why it mentions that the whole multitude of people were praying outside at the hour of incense. That here is what's going to happen is there's a lot of people outside while Zacharias is inside.
Yeah. Do y'all? I think we all had the same Bible teacher down at college. I say Paul, Tom, and I. Mr. Hunter.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right? Did y'all remember his coverage of this particular story?
Well, that was about 30 years ago, I guess.
Yeah, I actually had Phil Roberts for New Testament. So, but
oh, did you? Okay, all right. Anyway, what I guess the only thing I probably learned from Brother Hunter, probably learned more, but what really stuck in my mind about this has to do with the level of responsibility this priest had. And supposedly, and I've not seen this written anywhere, but he told us that supposedly they tied a rope, around like the ankle or around the waist of the priest that would go into the temple to burn the incense, so that if something went wrong and the Lord struck him dead, then they would pull him out of the temple there. And the reason I say that, like I said, I can't confirm that, but that's what I was told. But this was a very important thing he was doing. And you think about it, there had been some 400 years since God communicated with his people like this. So, Paul, when you pointed out that the whole multitude of people were praying outside the house of incense, I think that kind of lends towards the significance and the importance of what was going on here.
Yeah, and John, one real quick thing I'd add to that. I don't think this just happened with this particular occasion when Zacharias was going in. I think it happened every time. Whenever the lot fell on a priest to go do this, those who were righteous and those who were there, they would be offering prayers to God for the one who was doing it. And you had a group. You had a group like that. You had a group that was anxiously anticipating God to do something. It's interesting when you look at the life of Jesus, and we don't know all the details, but the 400 years from the time of Malachi up to the time of Jesus being born are known as a period of silence. And we don't have a lot of record of miracles being performed during that time, and definitely nothing inspired. And so, people are greatly anticipating and looking toward a time for the fulfillment of some promises that God had made.
Yeah. I think this has been a couple months, maybe even a year ago, we were discussing kind of this very point. And Wayne pointed out that even in the Jewish history of that 400 years, there's no prophet of God that was well known like Malachi or Zechariah. There was no, as far as we have recorded for us, no communication between God and his people directly, like what's about to happen. All right. Any thoughts? Any comments? Brian, I'm going to go ahead and throw to you, if you would, this next section. And the reason why we wanted to take a minute to bring out about this period of silence, the Lord not communicating with them, is it might help us to understand Zechariah's potential reaction when the angel appeared to him. So go ahead and read, if you would, beginning of verse 11, and let's read down through verse 17, if you would, please.
I will say too, to that point, it's interesting that the very last message that God sent, Malachi, the very last chapter, the very last verses are about John the Baptist. So it's really neat then that the very first thing that God has to say again is about John the Baptist too.
That is a great bookend observation there. I like that.
Yeah, it's a neat point. Am I reading verses 11 through 17?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry. I'm in the wrong place.
Hey, while you find that, Brian, another thing that just occurs to me is that, and you mentioned this, that Zechariah was righteous and blameless. Generally speaking, when we hear about the priests and the leaders of the Jews in the gospel, they're a rotten bunch of people. But that doesn't mean there weren't exceptions to that. And that's an interesting thing to note, that when you speak of the Jews and the leaders of the Jews and those people as a whole, it's a very bad situation. But it's encouraging to know that among that group were some people like Zacharias who were faithful to God.
And interestingly, Eric, I would say obviously we don't know the numbers, the percentages of the righteous versus the unrighteous, but we do know who sticks out. I mean, and that's just true. Those typically the corrupt ones are the ones that will stand out and be the ones who will be more noticed in those types of things, and they have a way of, for lack of a better term, weaseling themselves to the top. Mm-hmm. But there were priests that were godly. A quick example that I'm reminded of in that is in the Old Testament after Jeroboam created the false religion. Many of the priests left Samaria, left Israel, and went down to Judah. So you had those that were righteous, those that wanted to follow God that did that. And obviously, I think there was always some that were there. And Zechariah fits in that group.
Okay, good point. All right, Brian, go ahead.
Luke chapter 1, 11 through 17. Then an angel of the Lord appeared to him, standing on the right side of the altar of incense. And when Zacharias saw him, he was troubled, and fear fell upon him. But the angel said to him, "Do not be afraid, Zacharias, for your prayer is heard, and your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you shall call his name John. And you will have great joy and gladness, and many will rejoice at his birth. For he'll be great in the sight of the Lord, and shall drink neither wine nor strong drink. He will also be filled with the Holy Spirit, even from his mother's womb. And he'll turn many of the children of Israel to the Lord their God. He will also go before him in the spirit and power of Elijah, to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the disobedient to the word of wisdom, to the wisdom of the just, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord."
All righty. Thank you, Brian. I appreciate that. Brian, I was looking at this particular section here, and it's, can you imagine Zacharias' reaction to the angel?
Yeah, he's supposed to be in there alone. Have you ever had that surprise where you thought you were alone in a room, and you turn around and somebody's there? That alone would have scared. Advanced in years, he had a heart attack. Just scared him so bad.
Well, I'll share this little story with you to illustrate what you're talking about. I have an aversion to church buildings at night in the dark. I've gotten over it a little bit now, but when we were in McAllister years ago, we were over there on a Saturday night, and I was trying to get my wife's helped me get the bulletins folded, or we were doing something. And our two little girls, that time Rebecca and Sarah, probably maybe 3 or 4 years old, about 14 months apart. They were playing in one of the back classrooms. And it was probably 11:30 at night, and all of a sudden they came running down the hallway, and they said, Mommy, Daddy, we saw Jesus." I told Rod, I said, "We're leaving right now. I'm not going back there. We are leaving." So if you imagine, like what you're saying, he was all alone, and then this angel appears, and I don't know if there's any record of an angel appearing to someone and that person saying, "Oh, wonderful, great to see you." I think in every instance there's fear. Yeah. Okay, Brian, any thoughts or comments about the angel's promise to Zechariah? And then we'll open it up for others as well.
Well, I wanted to make a comment real quick just about verse 15.
Sure.
That there's a strong parallel here to the calling of the prophet Samson. If we go back to the book of Judges, chapter 13, and you have that calling, the angel of the Lord appears to the man and woman. They were barren, so it's a similar scenario to start. And this angel of the Lord appears. He says, you're going to conceive a child. And they make this similar statement, no wine, drink no wine, or anything like that. And of course, in that text, he says he's a Nazarite from birth. And many people kind of say perhaps that is John the Baptist too, although that term is never used in the New Testament. It is an interesting thing. Samson means sunlight or sunshine. And it's kind of interesting to think of the idea that John the Baptist was going to be somebody who was going to make ready a path for the light of the world. So in John chapter 1, when John is preaching, he's saying, here, it's the light of the world. So that's kind of a neat comparison to think about, that this wasn't something completely unknown. This had happened before, and one of the greatest of the judges, although we also consider his great moral flaws, but one of the greatest of the judges would be called in this way. And so now we see the coming of John the Baptist, who we're told in Matthew chapter 11 is going to be the greatest man who's lived until Christ.
That's a good point. That's a good point. I've wondered if maybe the reason why Luke doesn't mention anything about the Nazarite vow might have been his audience. But Matthew, doesn't refer to it either. So, all right, other thoughts?
It's kind of interesting that the angel tells him what to name him John.
Yeah.
And so you wonder, what does the name John mean? John, what does your name mean?
Grace.
Yeah, grace. Yeah, and actually, looking up the word, it means Yahweh or Jehovah is gracious.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when you think about it, you look at the prophets. Most of the prophets either have the name El or Yah in them, either Yahweh or Jehovah or Elohim. Jehovah or God is gracious.
Yeah, that's a good point. All right, any other thoughts on this section of 11 through 17? All right, let's see. I think we need to talk about verse 17 here for just a moment. Let me bring this back up, because this was an interesting conversation that we had in our Tuesday morning class. We talked about this. And notice here, there we go. It says in verse 17, he will also go before him in the spirit and power of Elijah, to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the disobedient to the wisdom of the just, and to make ready a people prepared for the Lord. What are your thoughts on that phrase, to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the disobedient to the wisdom of the just? They'll probably mean the same thing, just stated two different ways. What are your thoughts on that? Anyone? Go ahead, Tom.
One observation that I would make in this is, he's talking about Elijah, and he's actually referring back to Malachi, the very last book of the Old Testament, 400 years earlier. Matter of fact, the last two verses of the Old Testament are dealing with, I will send Elijah. And here we have this declaration. And so in reality, I think this is a resuming of God's revelation to his people, and that's one of the observations that is made here. And obviously, the whole point that is made is turning the hearts of the fathers to the child. I think the point is he's emphasizing turning them back to God, and maybe say the leaders, turning the hearts of the leaders back to those whom they are entrusted with leading, shepherding, whatever term you want to use, based on what their responsibility was.
All right, Paul, you got any thoughts on that?
Within, oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's you, Paul, if you had any thoughts on it.
The leadership within the Jewish religion had become very corrupt in many ways, and so to turn the hearts of the fathers, the older, the leaders, those who should be mature, to help them to be humble and to turn to God. And that's, if we're viewing that as a parallel statement, the disobedient to the wisdom of the just, recognizing God, eliminating their corruption. John was known as being a fiery, turn or burn preacher of repentance. And so trying to get people to wake up and to see the corruption and the sin in their lives.
Okay. All right. There was we've got a comment that's come up in the chat room. We'll bring that in here, or on Facebook. We'll bring it here in just a second. One of the, and I don't know if this is what he meant by that, Paul, but one of the things we were talking about in class is you think about look at children and you look at just, and we thought about what Tom had mentioned about, pointing their attention where it needs to be, which could be. But I wonder if he's talking about the children's willingness to obey. Like the one must be as a child in order to enter into the kingdom of heaven. And to take the fathers who had rebelled against God and turned their hearts to that of the children who would willingly accept the Lord and follow him. And then the disobedient, turning the disobedient to the wisdom of the just. Creating a people with the heart and the mind who would accept, or as he says, prepare them for the Lord, who would accept the teachings of the Lord.
Yeah, I think we're not going to do that in this study, but if you would do a study of humility, as a child is humble, you'd find that humility and obedience are so very closely tied together, and rebellion and disobedience, or pride and disobedience, are very closely tied together.
Exactly, and much of what Israel missed during their years of disobedience.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so here's what we have in the chat room. We have Tony Richline has joined us. We actually have several who have joined us. Joe Mounts and Robin and Aaron and others. And we've got several, I say several, we have some over in our actual chat room, Stephen and Greg and others. It's definitely good to have you with us during our study today. But here's what Rich, pardon me, I walked away from it. Clicked away from it. Tony Richline says, Brian, the first one goes back to what you were talking about in regards to verse 15. And notice here that he says, sorry, I'm clicking too many buttons. Well, Brian, why don't you read that comment for me, if you would?
Yeah, you betcha. So Tony Richline has a couple of comments here. His first one is that he points to verse 15 again. He says Jesus also uses verse 15 in his teaching. Jesus would later talk about John, who came neither eating nor drinking, and you say he has a demon. Which again is very interesting, because then of course Jesus contrasts to say I came, and you say I'm a drunkard and a glutton. It is interesting, that this particularly holy, and I think what Tony might even be pointing us back to is that when Samson was called, it was known he was holy from birth, and those characteristics that were holy, they saw as mentally ill or demonic possessed, oddly enough. So that's kind of interesting. And then Tony's second comment there on Facebook is he asked a question: is John the only person who has been filled with the Holy Spirit from birth? And that's a great question. And I was just thinking about that beyond, we might think of Christ, of course. And I'm not sure it says that about Samson. I wonder if it's meant to be inferred or not, but I'm not sure about that either. Well, anybody have an answer to that?
I don't have an answer, but what might be an interesting connection is the fact that when Mary walks in her visit to Elizabeth, the baby, hearing her voice, leaps in the womb. That may be why John or Luke brings that out, because it shows the baby's recognition, at least the Holy Spirit being in the baby, the recognition of her voice before he's ever born. That could be within the narrative why that is brought out. But other than that, I don't know. It's a good question. Any other thoughts on that?
Right.
All right. Any other thoughts? Oh, go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, I was going to say there are other comments. There's quite a few comments made in the chat list. Some of them dealing with things that we're well past them. But there is a little bit of discussion dealing with like the name of John, talk about Jonah, and even Samson is being brought up. A couple of somebody asked, what does Samson mean? Son child versus John, Yahweh is gracious, and so on. Okay. And somebody asked the question, I was just wondering why Zacharias was commanded to name him John as he did. And that's I don't know if I have the complete answer other than
I do wonder.
Proclamation that God is gracious. I mean, John's about to become the forerunner of Jesus, and declare the graciousness of God. So God gave him a name.
It's kind of interesting with Jesus. He was prophesied to be Emmanuel, but he's not named Emmanuel. They tell him at the time to be named Jesus. And John was kind of prophesied to be Elijah, but they didn't name him Elijah. They named him John. So I think it's kind of interesting that in both circumstances, there's a prophetic name, and then there's a name given at birth, angelic, by angels' orders.
Yeah. And it has a meaning to it, which is always the point. I mean, anytime in the Bible where God says, you shall call his name, fill in the blank, it would do you well to research that name, because that will help you remember that person.
Okay. That's a good point. And I do want to apologize if we did miss some of the comments in the chat room there. I apologize for that. But some of y'all have brought them in the course of the discussion by referencing them, and I appreciate that. And Stephen makes an interesting comment there regarding there being a parallel between Samuel and John, possibly, or maybe a bit of a parallel, he says. All right. Any thoughts or comments about that? All right, let's see. Paul, I have serious questions regarding whether or not we're going to make it through the end of the first chapter by the third week of this new book. So we'll see what happens. All right, let's go a little bit farther here within our study. Let's pick up now in verse 18. And Tom, if you would, read for us verses 18 through 23, sir.
All right, 18 through 23, and I'm reading from the New King James. We read there, and Zacharias said to the angel, how shall I know this? For I am an old man, and my wife is well advanced in years. And the angel answered and said to him, I am Gabriel, who stands in the presence of God, and was sent to speak to you and bring you these glad tidings. But behold, you will be mute and not able to speak until the day these things take place, because you did not believe my words, which will be fulfilled in their own time. And the people waited for Zacharias and marveled that he lingered so long in the temple. But when he came out, he could not speak to them, and they perceived that he had seen a vision in the temple, for he beckoned to them and remained speechless. So it was, as soon as the days of his service were completed, that he departed to his own house.
All right, thank you, Tom. Tom, there's a couple of things here that we might want to take note of before we move on to our next section there. Would you say that, in your opinion, or your view, would you say that Zacharias would have been classified as an unbeliever, or do you think what he heard was a bit too much for him at that moment, and he questioned?
Right. Well, he clearly was a believer. I mean,
Yeah.
You look at the description that was given to him, as we talked about earlier, being righteous. Both he and Elizabeth were believers from that standpoint. But bear in mind, if our understanding is true that God had not miraculously interacted with his people for 400 years, what happens here is extremely out of the ordinary.
Yeah.
And it would be enough. It would be enough to take anybody back. I know it would me, from that standpoint. So I see that, and of course, I mean, it seems that he clearly knew that this was an angel speaking to him, and so on. But yet there was still some kind of doubt, that he has. I don't want to call him an unbeliever, even though
Right.
it says you did not believe. Yeah, I mean, basically, he didn't believe the statement. He had a hard time conceiving the statement as a human. I mean, consider what he's being told. Well, what's going to happen? Your wife, who is barren, is going to have a boy. No, you're kidding me.
Yeah, it's one of those. It's one of those conversations where later he probably said to himself, Why didn't I think about Abraham?
Yeah, yeah.
Where we get the echo from?
Which incidentally, you had some doubt with Abraham, or actually Sarah more than Abraham. And actually, you know, I can't help but wonder if Abraham questioned it a little bit. You know, when it talks about Abraham laughing and so on, and he basically, long story short, says, "Oh, you don't have to do that."
Yeah.
You know.
I tell you what, in my personal opinion about this, and y'all can tell me what you think. I really think that the whole of this is working out to show the power of God.
Absolutely.
And the fact that He caused him to go mute, until the child was born, and then through his writing the name John, this is what he will be called. It just gives further confirmation of the will of God being done here. All right, any thoughts or comments? Any other thoughts about this section? I didn't see much more really to labor on, other than he goes back home and he's going to wait until, of course, the baby to be born and would be speechless until then.
Right. You know, John, we obviously don't have time to discuss it, and I don't know how we want to factor some of these things, but just the subject of doubt is a challenge within itself. You know, I mean, there are some who say that if you doubt, you got a problem as a Christian. Well, I would ask the question, what do you mean? What do you mean by doubt? You know, and what is your attitude with that, what you're questioning, and so on. And I believe that that's a real challenge today, based on the society that we're living in. But anyways, I know we don't have time to go into great discussion on that or detailed. But.
Any thoughts or comments about that?
You know, it's a kind of interesting. Later, it'll be Zacharias' son John in Matthew chapter 11 that seems to have the doubt when he sends the messengers to Jesus and says, "Are you the one, or should we look for another?" And I've always used that passage as an example that Jesus doesn't rebuke him, but just gives him the answer of, you know, what's written, what have you seen? And I've often said that perhaps we might consider God's, you know, that he's very understanding, that we can be plagued with doubt, that he has a sense of understanding in that.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's like anything else. Any issue that you deal with, it's not always the issue itself, it's how you deal with it. You know, I mean, faith. You know, what is faith? Trusting God. You know, even when you don't understand, you trust God. And so that kind of helps you, you know, that's kind of the attitude we need to have with doubt. There's things I may not understand, fully comprehend, but I'm not going to throw in the towel here and walk away and say there is no God, or no, that's not true, or whatever, those types of things. Your faith has to enter into the picture, and that keeps you going.
Yeah. All righty, good points. Good points on that, Tom. All right, let's go ahead and real quick, Eric, are you with us? Yes. I'm going to give you the hardest of the readings today. Would you read verses 24 and 25, please?
Yes, I will. Let's see if I can get it all on the screen here from your thing. Now, after those days, his wife Elizabeth conceived, and she hid herself for 5 months, saying, "Thus the Lord has dealt with me in the days when he looked on me to take away my reproach among people."
She reminds me of Hannah. You know, kind of in the prayer that Hannah offered after she conceived the child. Yeah.
Yeah, in the ancient days, it was a huge thing to be barren, and it would be even, you know, people today spend thousands of dollars and years trying to have a child if that's if that's what they want to do. But it seemed to have been especially, like she says, there's this word reproach. It was it was almost seen as something of a curse or something bad about you if you weren't able to have children. So she's obviously relieved and feels very blessed in her to be able to have a child at this point.
That's good. That's a very good point. Very good point. All right, well, gentlemen, we have reached the top of the hour, actually a little bit past, and we did start a few minutes late due to some issues here locally. So we'll probably have right about an hour's worth of study once we pull it to a close. What do y'all say? Y'all like to plan to pick up then with verse 26 and see how much farther we can make it next week. Okay. And what we'll do is, when we're done, we'll kind of spend some time talking about how the study went. Like I said, we're not going back to quite the old way before our Hebrew study. We're still going to have each of us take a chapter and kind of host that study through that chapter and guide it. But since we're in a gospel account, it's going to be a little bit easier. I mean, we're looking at facts laid out, not so much doctrine and deeper principles that we might need to mine pretty good. But this is a very simple study with some interesting and deeper points, obviously, we'll talk about. Paul, were you going to say something, sir?
Nope.
All right, well, what you said just now, you said very well, and I appreciate that.
I had said I thought it was good that we go ahead and and close for today, review and see what we can do next time.
All right, sounds good. Well, let's do that. Let's plan to go ahead and pull the study to a close today. We'd like to thank you so much for joining us for this study through the Gospel of Luke. We have looked at Luke chapter 1 and verses 1 through 25. And let me encourage you, if you've not taken the time to read the Gospel of Luke, go ahead and do so. It is a wonderful gospel account to study. You learn a lot about Christ, and as we've pointed out, it helps to put a lot of things maybe into perspective when you study the other gospels, and it would definitely be worth your time. Any other final thoughts or comments? And let's see, Brian, I'll start with you.
Nothing else. We had a great study this morning.
All right, I appreciate it. And, I'm sorry I didn't have much of you on our reel looking back over the 5 years, but you were there. You were there, and we showed your head a couple of times. I couldn't tell if it's yours, Eric's, or Paul. Y'all look alike, though, from this angle.
That's hurtful.
Eric, any final thoughts or comments?
I don't have anything to add. Sorry, I had to step away for a few minutes.
That's all right. That's right. Things happen. Tom?
No, looking forward to our continued study here.
Okay, and Paul?
No, just appreciate the study today and look forward to finding out more and more about this book of Luke and how we can be more like Christ.
Very good, absolutely. And Wayne, one of our regular participants, has been away for the last 2 weeks. As you know, Wayne and his family moved up to, Minnesota, I think? But what has kept him busy is a local Bible study there, an individual that he's been studying with, and this was really the only time frame on Wednesdays that the fella was available to study, and so that's why Wayne has been away. And Brendan was with us for a few minutes, but he's having some computer issues, and so hopefully we'll get that ironed out and he can join us again the next week. But we want to thank you for spending this time studying with us from the Word of God. And hopefully we are factoring the truth into our lives. And when we get to the end of Luke 1, we will review some of the truth factoring moments. But we won't do that until we hit the end of the chapter. So, Lord willing, we'll be able to continue our study. We're going to aim for next Wednesday, and that should be the 27th of September. And you can meet us here at 11 o'clock a.m. Central Time.
That's noon in the Eastern time zone.
9 a.m. Pacific.
10 a.m. Mountain Time.
Eric, you want to throw another one out?
Right here at live.truthfactor.com.
That was mine.
Oh.
Thank you very much. Y'all have a wonderful week. We'll see you next week.